Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Reading the Room Book Club for April 2023. Today, we are talking about Eleanor Catton's Birnam Wood. I have never read Eleanor Catton before. This is my first book of hers, and I really enjoyed it. And before we dive into the book, I just wanted to announce next month's pick, which is, hold please, The Birthday Party by Laurent Mavignier, I believe how you say his name. It's French, translated French novel that was longlisted for the International Booker Prize this year. It is again giving literary thriller, I believe, that's kind of been like the book club picks the last few times. So it wasn't intentional, but I think it'll be a fun one. So hope you can all join next month for this one. It's again a little bit long, 450 pages roughly, but I hear that it kind of flies by. It's very suspenseful, intense. So that is that. And then before we dive into the book today, I will give a quick synopsis of Birnam Wood to refresh our memories, and then we'll dive into this wild romp of a book. So it says 5 years ago, Mira Bunting founded a guerrilla gardening group, Birnam Wood, an undeclared, unregulated, sometimes criminal, sometimes philanthropic gathering of friends. This activist collective plants crops wherever no one will notice, on the sides of roads, in forgotten parks and neglected backyards. For years, the group has struggled to break even. Then Mira stumbles on an answer, a way to finally set the group up for the long term. A landslide has closed the Corwai Pass, cutting off the town of Thorndyke. Natural disaster has created an opportunity, a sizable farm, seemingly abandoned. But Mira is not the only one interested in Thorndyke. Robert Lemoyne, an enigmatic American billionaire, has snatched it up to build his end times bunker, or so he tells Mira when he catches her on the property. Intrigued by Mira, Birnam Wood, and their entrepreneurial spirit, he suggests they work this land. But can they trust him? And as their ideals and ideologies are tested, can they trust each other? So this was, there's a lot to unpack here. So let's just get into it. What did you all think? Did you like it? Did you not? I'll start with Ellie at the top.
Okay. When I started reading it, I really liked it. And I thought it was very literary and it was very character driven. I love that. And then it kind of switched perspective. And I thought, okay, this is more of a thriller than I thought it was going to be. And I wasn't too fond of that. But I kept reading. And ultimately, I really enjoyed it and I really liked it. I think after having finished it, because I didn't want to spoil the ending at all. So I didn't read much about it. I didn't listen to many interviews. I just wanted to read it and experience it. And then afterwards, I did go back and I watched some interviews with the author. And the more of those that I read, and then the more that I understood the book and where it was coming from, a lot of the comparison to Macbeth and the different Macbeth characters and that kind of thing, the more I enjoyed it and the more I think about it, the more I like it. I think in the moment I wasn't a huge fan. And I hate to say that one of the things I really hated were the long chapters. And there was so much going on and it was so dense and there were so many words. I like needed a break. And those two breaks that you get are just like, oh, I needed more. So that I think kind of drew me away from it. But ultimately, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, Chad, what do you think?
Um, I finished it last night or yesterday afternoon, so it's pretty fresh. And I really, really liked it. It's among my favorite things I've read this year, I would have to say. And I will say that I read both the rehearsal and the luminaries when they came out. I have been anticipating this book, knowing the skill of Catton as a writer and her storytelling. And I had heard the rumblings that it's more of a thriller, and there's this weird kind of guerrilla gardening group and an American billionaire. But it just kind of hit me at the right reader at the right time, right book. And I really enjoyed it. I really didn't mind how like dense it is. I kind of enjoyed the opening and how she just focuses on a smaller group and then kind of expands outward to the dervishes and to other, I liked her plotting. I think that's probably the number one thing I enjoyed was her plotting. Felt very intentional. You could tell that she must have been working from some great outline. It felt very good and satisfying, even though the ending is extremely dark. That really, I kept hearing about that because again, this book came out about a month ago, and like, oh, the ending's really intense, and I'm like, okay, we'll see. And then I was really taken by surprise on the ending. So that's my little opinion.
Okay, and then I know Alex, we talked about this before we started recording, but I think you have a different opinion. So what do you make of it?
Yes, although hearing Chad and Ellie clarify their reasonings has me like shape-shifting my thoughts a lot because to echo Chad as well, I've also read Luminaries or just Catton in general. So even though I will say definitively I did not like this book, I would say I do appreciate it though, but I feel like this only proves how much, since I loved Catton's past work, that I do feel like she is a versatile writer. And I think no matter what, she's a writer that will really stay with me because I think what she's always writing about is really fresh. Like I would much take this Birnam Wood versus a lot of the fiction I can think of that I read this year already, that even though I also maybe enjoyed those more, they maybe won't feel as much of an impression as Birnam Wood is to me. That can come with a lot of things though, this being a new release and just hearing the buzz about it. I was pretty much in the dark, but I agree with the ending. It was very risk-taking, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And I think overall I do like the ending. I didn't know where it was going to go, but I think I like how it happened. But who knows, because of everyone knowing I didn't like this book, maybe that's why. But I do really love the characters in this book, like the Dervishes that was mentioned, Tony, all of them really. They do feel like these really lived in and fully fleshed people, but maybe I just don't like how Catton kind of coordinated them within this specific story. It kind of felt very, I don't know, not like I hate to compare it to like Luminaries because I know it's unfair that we're only talking about this book, and I don't want to use that as a way to compare Catton and who hasn't read Luminaries or anything. But it is a bit similar how it is constructed that way, where it has a lot of characters and it is building up to this moment, which to me I think was a much better payoff in its creativity. I think Birnam Wood kind of got caught up in, like what Ellie said, me also realizing things about like the Shakespeare comparisons. So that's how I can appreciate it. But maybe it's just my own personal things that I appreciate versus what I don't. Me preferring the atmosphere of Luminaries in particular. So overall, didn't like it, but I appreciated everything that was going on. I think it's more of a me problem versus a Catton problem.
Yeah, I mean, just to chime in, I guess, with my thoughts before we dive into the meat of this. I agree with like basically everything you guys are saying. I mean, I love this book, but I did have some problems with it generally. I think my favorite thing about this book is the characterization and the way Ellie was speaking about this, but there are like really no chapter breaks, or there's just a few, and she breaks paragraphs which kind of switch perspectives after a while, and the audiobook clearly kind of indicates which section is which character, which kind of helped that a little bit. But I really liked when Eleanor Catton was just like writing her fucking ass off, like in certain sections. I was like, this is so like for a thriller, especially, and how she kind of dives into, I guess, kind of like social realism and the sort of, I don't know, kind of the nuances of each character was really well done in my opinion. And I just loved those kind of long sweeping passages where she really dives into like Mira and Shelley's motivations. And even when she kind of indulges in the, I don't know, the psycho nature of Lemoyne a little bit was really fun to read as well. I will say my problems with the book sometimes come with, I think it's a me problem more than the book's problem, but like trying to envision what was happening in terms of setting and how the characters were moving and how that all kind of played out. And just from like a realist perspective, some of the coincidences I found with like technology was I was a little unsure about how to think about it, but I kind of just took it as what it was and assumed that Lemoyne could just hack Mira's phone and do that kind of stuff. I was like, is that really how that would work? But I mean, maybe an American billionaire like him would be able to do that. I don't know. But it was sometimes I was like, yeah, it's a little bit too coincidence heavy. But then I was thinking about this being a tragedy, and I'm like, well, maybe she's kind of moving those things intentionally to kind of steer it towards this ending. So at the end of the day, it still worked for me, but I want to unpack that maybe a little bit later. But I guess to start, does anyone here have a familiarity with Macbeth and can kind of speak to the Shakespearean kind of ties of this all? Because I am not well versed in Shakespeare at all, but the epigraph is a Macbeth quote.
Not really.
No. Okay.
I think I've read like one or two other like modern retellings of Macbeth, but I'm not well versed enough to know what is directly being pulled from the original text. Sorry, Jacob.
No worries. I mean, I probably should have done a little bit more research in case no one knew, but that's all right. Yeah, I mean, I guess we can just speak to Macbeth being a tragedy and kind of that So after I finished this book, I was really trying to reframe my kind of understanding of it in terms of how she was trying to steer it there. And I guess I'll just give a quote that she gave in an interview that really speaks to what I think she's doing in this book, and then we can talk about the characters and what happens in the end. So she says, we're staring down our own finitude as a species, as a planet, and I think that there's something very dangerous about thinking like that. It can become a license to behave however you like, really. But it's also this kind of depression, the kind of depression that Macbeth voices at the end of Macbeth, when Lady Macbeth dies and he says, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. You know, who cares? This is all just a tale told by an idiot. He's such a nihilist in that moment, and so I was very certain to myself that I did not want to write a nihilistic book. I didn't want to write a depressing book. I wanted to write a book that excited you because it made you want to know what was going to happen to these characters. If you achieve that as a writer, you're giving the reader a sense of the future. You're making them want to keep reading, and so even for a little moment in that brief time that they're reading your book, they have a reason to live. And interesting, because when I finished this, I was like, this is a horror novel. This is depressing as hell. Everyone dies. But that is true. I mean, in the moment, as I was kind of speaking to you before, I loved spending time with these characters, even in all their messiness. And I don't know, like when Tony was making certain decisions that, you know, I didn't love. It was just, I don't know. At the end of the day, it was really fun kind of spending time with them. And I really was like rooting for everyone despite where it was heading. So what do you think about what she's saying there about how she didn't want this to be a nihilistic book or a depressing book? Like, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it's interesting because as you were reading that, to me, this is one of those novels where whether she meant it or not, to me captures a lot of like the feeling that a lot of people maybe our age feel towards like the structures that rule our countries and governments. Like there's a lot of like despair and this feeling that like, well, we can't do anything. We feel like there's inaction, and like that's evident in some of the viewpoints of the members of Birnam Wood, and we can get into like some of like maybe the interesting political discussions of like, do you follow your heart and like, do you take like this offer that this billionaire is giving you, or do you like stick to your ideals, and what does that mean? Like, is that really practical, and is that really something that we can do with I don't know. But I still found it kind of a nihilistic book because it's just depressing to hear about, you know, once you find out what really Lemoyne is doing and trying to like excavate these minerals from this land. And even the last sentence of the book, you know, like, sorry that like Tony wants to like burn up this whole place so that someone can come. And he's also like, well, I hope someone can put out the fire. It's tragic. It is really tragic, maybe more so than nihilist. But anyways, I'm getting a little off tangent here.
No, I mean, that resonates with me too. I think that ending, you know, scene where Tony's kind of looking up to the sky, it kind of like is a, I don't know, thinking about like religion or trying to think of some like higher like entity that can kind of transcend all of this to really help us kind of have some sense of hope, you know. And I think that is, I'm trying to figure out what Catton, I understand what she's saying in terms of capitalism and sort of like how we feel, I guess people of our age, kind of how we feel like the inevitability of climate change and what can we really do about this, right? And I think this, when I picked this book up and hearing it being about like a guerrilla gardening group, it's kind of funny to me in terms of like how I pictured it, in terms of people sneaking into backyards and you know, planting things. Like I never really heard of that before, and it's just kind of like a interesting, I guess, impetus for a novel like this, but then it kind of explodes from there. That's why I wasn't really expecting all of the death to come at the end. But I mean, what do you all think she's saying by the end of this with that kind of final passage with Tony? And I don't know, what do you think is the takeaway there, like from all of this? Like, is there hope or or no?
I feel like one interpretation I have, because this is something, as we've been talking about it, that's always stayed with me, especially with the quote you read, Jalen, and Chad, to what you just said a moment ago. I feel like with the ending, thinking about hoping for like just in general being seen, in this case of like being a survivor and hoping you survive the situation, maybe I would think Catton's trying to say, maybe all it boils down to is no matter what we've done, as long as no one sees it, then it doesn't matter. So in this case, like a literal life-saving instance. But I was really struck by the very first time where Mira meets Lemoyne, and then she's so quick to come up with this like charade of like, oh, I'm actually this person and this is why I'm here. She didn't think twice about it. She just quickly lied, and it was so easy. And the only way that was proven to be not true was Lemoyne having the resources that he's like looked up online or whatever it was. I can't exactly remember. But between that scene, which was really jarring and like a really interesting way to me, the rest of the book really had this evidence of, if I remember right, whether Tony or Mira or whoever, I would have thought there were these scenes that were just like one quick Google search of something, but it turned out to be 5 pages of intensive like searching and like basically creating a rabbit hole of something on the internet. So I think with Catton, it's like, well, in Tony's case, like wanting to be like rewarded by like discovering something. He doesn't, it was kind of jarring also that he was so concerned about kind of becoming famous about what he was uncovering versus like, how am I gonna live to tell the tale? That is just kind of sad. It makes it more somber where this idea of legacy is only based on what exists online or what can be found about you versus who you really are, like as a person. And yeah, I don't know. That really stayed with me a lot. And that's what I liked the most about this book. These are recurring instances of very intensive, relentless, uh, emotionless instances of just like uh, really carving at how easy it is to find whatever you want online and just be whoever you want to be. Thinking back to that uh, way I cited about Mira meeting Lemoyne, Robert,
Yeah.
whatever his name is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was so interesting. I kind of wish Catton would have done more of that between the interactions of these characters versus it in the end to me feeling like a witch hunt for whatever reason, because I don't understand it other than just Robert being intimidating, because he did read intimidating to me. It was so easy for him to manipulate all these people. And I don't really believe that. I also don't believe of a giant random machine, whatever, like overseeing like a survey of land or whatever that was in Birnam Wood. But I don't know. Maybe it's because everyone, Shelley, Mira, and Tony, they all listen to Boxer by The National. Maybe that's why. I mean, it sounds like a good susceptible group for being manipulated. So, maybe they deserved it. But yeah, that's everything I thought of based on what we talked about so far.
Well, I think that out of this group, I'm like the Macbeth expert because I watched a 10-minute summary on YouTube about Macbeth. I've never read it, so I didn't quite know what it was about. So I'm like, okay, I have to have some idea. And one of the things I got from it is that the lead character, Macbeth, he is very ambitious and single-minded. And I also read or I listened to an interview with the author, and she talks about how she wanted each character to be a Macbeth, because oftentimes people in the real world will give another person a Macbeth like trait, and they don't necessarily put the trait of Macbeth on themselves. You don't think, you don't say you're ambitious and single-minded, because that's not really a compliment towards yourself. So after I heard about that, I started looking at each character, and it's so true. I mean, each character, I don't really want to say they're selfish, but they definitely are ambitious and single-minded, but they're looking out for themselves. I feel like, at the drop of a hat, they're willing to accept all of this money, Birnam Woods they're taking all this money to, make their organization bigger and stronger and more out there, or obviously, Robert is looking out for himself because he just wants more money, more money, more money. And Tony, he wants to break this story and he wants to, uncover all of this and be famous. He keeps talking about his byline. So I do think that like each character, they're kind of looking out for themselves. And yeah, you might think that that's selfish, but my gosh, we're all doing that. We're all looking out for ourselves. We're all single-minded in some way. So I really think that, with the ending, with everything just kind of falling apart and, this idea that we're all kind of, pushing our own agendas and looking out for ourselves, and it all kind of just crumbles around us. And so my takeaway, I don't know, is more like we have to maybe work together a little bit more. And I know that sounds really cheesy, but like, if we don't, ultimately, everything's going to crash and burn. That was my thought anyway.
No, I think that's great. I think that's really good because I was thinking like, we're describing these like selfish actions, but I would argue that like Catton does a good enough job of like placing the reader in a seemingly realistic depiction of contemporary life where it feels as though like there is no community anymore. The only way to get forward is to think of yourself and is to like work, take these, like even with so like Tony wanting to like be famous, he sees fame as like the outlet after like being kind of publicly shamed after like his ill-begotten article about traveling abroad. And then you have, you know, Shelley's from the beginning is thinking about leading the group, and she has quite, I think Shelley might be my favorite character actually. She has quite a interesting journey from when we meet her to the end. And then yeah, Mira is just like this incredibly like whip smart. Even before Alex, you mentioned how like she has this like she just said that she was somebody else, but like you read in the very opening pages that she created like a persona online over email to try and find out about the real estate holding for this land. And so you just from the jump, it's almost like she's this like super online, super self-aware of like people's perceptions of her. And I don't know, it felt authentic to me. Whether, and I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing, but I think that's part of the reason why it's sticking with me. And I think there's like that stickiness to the story is that it might be uncomfortable to like sit down and really grapple with, because there might be some pieces of it that like you could find in yourself. But yeah, I think that just led to like my enjoyment ultimately of like seeing how it does. And then I think the added bonus of like, as Ellie mentioned with the allusions to Macbeth, like for me, that's like extra candy of just like finding those other layers and thinking, wow, like Catton did such an incredible job of like putting so much more into the seemingly like just thriller novel.
Yeah, I mean, I think Shelley is my favorite character as well. I so I was gonna say this for a little bit later, but I guess we can just dive into it now. Who cares? The fact that she's the one that kills Owen Darvish, like that was wild to me. I didn't see it coming. I didn't expect him. So I knew this was a tragedy. I knew something was coming, and that was just the start of the tragedy, you know. But her character and kind of the way that after that happens, when she didn't intend to do it, she was high, and you know how all that plays out. Her character and how she ends up sleep. Oh, someone's here. Hold on, let me admit them. Her character and how she ends up like sleeping with Lemoyne and all of that. I feel like Catton really has fun with her in that last section, but her character and just the form of the tragedy here and kind of us being the audience members and how I assume maybe Shakespeare is discussed in terms of what a tragedy as a moral tale is trying to tell us. I think it's interesting how Catton blends this line of showing each character that is so human and so real and kind of resonates in different ways. I resonated with each character in different ways and saw a lot of myself in them. And it's quick to you know, upon closing of the book, kind of say you wouldn't do the same things that maybe Mira does or Shelley does. And I think it's interesting in the form of a tragedy how despite some of the unrealistic things that might happen, some things that I found myself hard to kind of understand, still points to something real in life. And I feel like that's what she's doing with the form, but I don't know if you all agree with that. I mean, how tragedy itself is kind of factoring into our understanding of the characters and then ourselves as well.
Yeah, I don't know. That's some good point, Jalen. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I'm just thinking, I guess I'm just thinking more about like, oh, I guess that person left. I'm sorry.
I don't know where they went.
Was it Robert Lemoyne trying to hack in? I don't know.
Yeah, probably. I would not be surprised.
Sorry, I lost what you were saying, Jalen. We can scratch this.
Oh yeah, no worries. Yeah, I was just I don't know. I guess I kept thinking about. I guess maybe I should have packing Shelley a little bit more in what she's doing.
Oh
with
yeah.
Owen Darvish's death and kind of adding more nuance to her. It just made me think more about how she's kind of using each character as like a chess piece to illuminate something about ourselves. And we might not fully like we resonate with the character, but also say like, well, I wouldn't do what she's doing, or you know, like yeah. I think it's an interesting kind of blend of as audience, as outsiders, kind of watching the spectacle of tragedy. It's really interesting from a framing perspective how she kind of uses this form to explore that. So I guess all of that. Just what did you think about Owen Darvish's death, Shelley, and sort of the introduction of the last third?
Yeah, I mean, I found the death really surprising, but ultimately. Yeah, like she does with every other character, like she makes you sympathize with Owen Darvish, but then you're also kind of like, well, he's not really like a very good, virtuous person anyway. Like he's dumb enough to like just give up this. There's like so many other things. Well, I guess that's like the ultimate thing, right? As Shelley is very gray. She's not black or white, like just many of these other characters are. Even Tony, like there's like that great scene toward the beginning when like they're having this back and forth at this meeting. And they're just really debating like what is this group for? Like, who are we serving? What are our ideals? And that was like just a pure perfect example of like, oh yeah, like I really get that point. And then you hear like somebody else and you're like, well, I kind of get that point too. And then, or it gets too far where something so that Tony says, you're like, okay, you're kind of being an asshole. And then just, but I don't know, it just, all that stuff just really worked. And I guess the leading back to your question, Joan, about like Owen, and then the last third is that it kind of gets this like, gets back to this like idea of like inevitability. Circling back to like Macbeth and like thinking that like I'm going to set out to do this thing and it's going to be just like this, because like as much as they try, like, well, this accidental death happened, and so they just think that they can do anything they can to like cover their bases, and by digitally doing so, taking the car and putting it somewhere else, and then ultimately like there's like a misbegotten email that kind of like starts churning in Lady Darvish's head, and then I assume because she's referred to as Lady Darvish, there's like a Lady Macbeth piece that maybe is we could unpack there. But yeah, I don't know. Where else does everyone else think about what I'm saying? I don't know.
Yeah, am I here? Okay, yeah. I'll hop in. I think I want to talk about her next too, because I think it's interesting how like with Lady Darvish and her kind of coming at the end and like killing Lemoyne with the rifle. It's just really interesting how like how for a guy who murders everyone else by poison and is just has all of these kind of forces and money at play to kind of enforce what he's trying to do, how easily he's kind of shut down by an outsider that kind of comes in and just takes him out really quickly. But then she herself is taken out. It was just like how that all played out was kind of crazy to me. But what did you all think about like how the ending was written? Because for me, it was so much. It was kind of like torrential how it was all kind of playing out, and some of it was a little bit kind of hazy in terms of like when they're having the discussion, Tony, Mira, and Lemoyne, and then Lady Darvish comes in. This is how I'm recalling it, at least, and how she kind of sees like the coffee spilled on the ground, and then she goes out, and then all of us, like everyone's dead all of a sudden. They're all poisoned. Like, did that work for you? How that played out, or were you confused at all? Or
I actually love the ending. And, sometimes you read thrillers and like the last part of the book is just, it spells everything out for you step by step. This is what happened. And I loved that you didn't have to see that they had gotten poisoned. You didn't have to see Robert putting this poison into their breakfast or whatever and them eating it and dying. You didn't have to see that. But when you saw it through Lady Darvish, you saw exactly what happened and you knew everything that happened. And then going back to her, I loved that part where she just like takes control. She knows something's going on. She doesn't know what's going on, but she knows exactly what to do. The other guns are locked up. She knows where there's another gun. She, loads it. She walks how she's been trained, steady, aiming. I mean, she's so methodical about it. And you're just thinking, you go, girl, you're awesome. This is like, take control. And, ultimately she dies in the end, but she avenged her husband's death. And that was what her point was. She's like, I don't know what's going on here, but I know you caused my husband's death and I'm here to make right of that. So I really liked it. I also enjoyed, and this was throughout the book. And I think we touched on this earlier, where like you have the point of view from somebody, and then like within like the next paragraph, you're in the point of view of somebody else. And it's like that throughout the entire book. And even those last few pages, it was like that. You have the view from her, and then it goes into the view of Tony. And I always enjoyed that, because I don't need books spelled out for me. I don't need it step by step. I love just like this idea of like, you're smart enough to read this, you get it, you understand what's going on. And so yeah, those last couple of pages, I was reading the hardcover version, and I just kind of stopped and I started reading it out loud because I wanted to slow down. Because like you said, when you read too fast, when it's too plotty and you're like, I want to know what happens, you tend to like skim lines and read really quickly. And so I just kind of read it out loud to myself so that I could follow along and actually see what was going on. And I know everyone talks about the ending and it was so amazing, but it wasn't just the plot, it was how it was written. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, just real quick, I love that you brought that up, Ellie, the like how she would like kind of like work within one character's POV, end that section. You can tell there's a paragraph break and then you get into somebody else's POV, but she's so good at like giving you the moment just before or just after that the other character had, and seeing it from literally from a different perspective with different information that they know. That I think lends itself so well to like a thriller or a genre book, because I can't think of like any other traditional literary books like The Luminaries. Maybe Alex would know, but like in The Luminaries, if like something like this happens, where like you get a piece of information and then like another person gets it, I can't really recall, but seeing her do that throughout the entire 400 plus pages was just like really cool, because it really brought the reader in closer in my estimation, because it made you think. And just like you said, like I love a writer who's like, you're smart enough to get this, like I'm not gonna spell it out for you. And maybe that's why some people like didn't really care for it, because they think, oh, thriller, I can just like buzz through this in like a day, but like it really requires a little bit of focus.
Yeah, one thing that always made me think about this book is just how intentional it does feel like the past or last 150 or like 200 pages even does feel like it just really whizzes by, and how so it's clear Kat has a skill of this thriller concept that she wants to achieve, and makes me wonder, why exactly does she want to spend the first 250 pages or so where she knows clearly she could let readers go and they kind of snooze off where it's so dedicated between, Mira, Shelley, Tony, and the Darvishes, and Robert, which is so character driven and so particular. Like ever since I finished the book, probably a week ago now, it just makes me wonder, like, what is this festering that she's doing with these people? And I can only think of maybe it's this clarity of doubt that they all try to get these small suspicions of each other, even though it's not like I'm reading a version of Clue, it's as unexpected to the characters in the moment as it is to us, which I really enjoy. I don't know what it is, because I know it sounds weird I'm saying all these praises, but I still don't like the book. But I just feel like it maybe in some ways felt too severed to me. I think my favorite sense of doubt, if I were to just use that encompassing word, is between Lady Darvish and her assumptions of what happened to Owen and how he does, die and gets hit by a car or something. But if I remember right, she believed it under possible like promiscuity of like how he might be into these younger girls, Mira and Shelley. So we know for a fact the whole time she's wrong. So it kind of puts a little seed in my head, like, oh, why wouldn't I believe everybody? Kind of like what Ellie said earlier, like, which has enlightened me a lot about thinking of maybe it's each of these people has their own Macbeth and like their clear ambition. So why wouldn't I be rooting for everybody to, get what they want, versus clearly Robert being this like villain, if we want to call him that. And I guess really what does make Robert a bad person? I mean, of course, other than the end where he like poisoned all these people, which I'm sure we can all agree is bad. I don't think any of us think that's good. But even the choice of poison when there's no evidence is pretty fit for his character. And then the other evidence of like gunshot wounds or like bullets, that's much more easy to like gather information for. Again, it's so smart. I just love how smart Catton is, even though myself as a reader didn't particularly enjoy the book. I love seeing her demonstration of skill. So it sounds like such a snooty thing for me to say as a reader, like, oh, I understand her skill, I just didn't like it. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot to unpack, especially I bet imagining it for a reread. And I'm sure what a lot of readers will wonder is, why did I read the first 250 pages when I could have just read the last 150? Because if you think about it, we could summarize Mira, Shelley, Tony, and Robert pretty easily. Like they're just these, like that joke I made earlier, because it says it in the book. They're just pretty much Mira, Shelley, and Tony, all these people that listen to the National. And that's all you need to really know. I love this one scene too, where I think it's Tony, everyone's hating on him at this hui or whatever. Take a shot every time they say hui instead of meeting. And someone says, you don't believe in intersectionality or something like that to Tony. And I mean, clearly they're all progressive people, but they just all want to prove it to each other. So I think the whole fault of Shelley, even with the murder and like her accidentally killing someone, and then they keep having to give these chants of like, you're not a bad person, you're not a bad person. It's hard for them to believe that even though they technically are good people because they are progressive, that they're still capable of bad things. So it's easy for them to think that they can only be bad people if there's someone like Robert, who's slimy and intimidating and kind of honestly a weird guy. He's kind of a weirdo. So, that too. But yeah, I've said my piece. I'm gonna put myself on mute and then I'll wait.
No,
all that stuff.
I think that's really well put. And that hui, I think that's how the audio pronounced it, was so funny. I mean, there's such a satirical bent to this novel, which I'm always here for. And I think that scene is heightened because of like on the surface, yes, they are all like young millennials, leftists, who have this common idea of what is right and wrong. But once they get into the weeds of it and how it's implemented, like it just becomes this like laughing, you can't help but just laugh at like the extremes of it. But it also, I wanted to try and tie in that scene and with the theme of surveillance, because the drones play a large part of this book, and how Lemoyne is able to like keep tabs on everything that's happening in this from where he is. And I was just thinking like of that scene again, and it almost could be seen as like another form of surveillance, because he is now in this public meeting in this public place with this group of people, and they're all kind of like, whether they are thinking it or not, I would have to say like they're kind of like self-editing as they're speaking, because they're trying to like hit certain terms or buzzwords, or like surveilling the behavior of other folks, which is like a common criticism, I guess, of like certain people with these ideologies. Is that we don't really believe that, you know what I mean? And like there's like that great exchange about intersectionality. And yeah, I just thought that was like a really fun piece for Catton just to like go off and like fully talk about that, and just listen to her on other interviews talk about her own take on like New Zealand and like its own politics. But it still is a universal enough to like most Western readers to like they know what they're getting at. So just a fun observation.
Yeah, I mean, even on the cover, there is a drone. Very important, I think, to the book. But yeah, I mean, one thing, this might be a reach, and I'm sure everyone on this channel and who listens to this podcast is sick of me talking about this writer, but just bear with me. I was talking to CJ, my friend, who I wish she was here because she read the book as well. But we were talking about how much this book feels kind of similar to like Jonathan Franzen and what he does in his books in terms of kind of decentralizing narratives and kind of giving you a cast of characters and kind of using a close third to kind of go between each and sort of letting the reader kind of piece together their own kind of conception of what's going on. And I feel like Eleanor Catton, from a social realist bent and also from a formal level, is kind of doing a very similar thing, but instead of using a family like saga as sort of the genre that she's working in, it's now a thriller. And I think it's interesting kind of seeing how those two things structurally mirror each other, but are also quite different in terms of how they play out in terms of plot. But I mean, kind of going to what you were saying, Chad, I thought about this because of like the idea of surveillance, and it's interesting to me of how kind of the narration of this plays into how the novel is crafted in terms of sort of surveilling the characters' motivations from an outside neutral perspective, while still lending like a satirical bent where it's clear what Catton's doing with the construction, but she's not really being didactic with the telling at all. And even, I guess my question with all of this is kind of going to Lemoyne's character and some criticism that I've seen about this book in terms of some people saying that it's very clear kind of how she's depicting Lemoyne as this villain. To me, I know he kills everyone with with poison at the end, and he's clearly, bad. I think his character is a lot more nuanced than that, and I don't necessarily think that Catton is. I don't know. I just want to talk about Lemoyne and how he's constructed. And do you think that he's necessarily just pure villain, or do you think that there's more kind of nuance to his character in how everything's crafted, with everyone kind of getting their own sort of narration, I guess, in terms of that close third?
I think my opinion of him, Lemoyne, is that out of every character in the book, he's the one that takes charge. So people are given the opportunity to try to, take accountability like they seemingly want to about the world, whether through Birnam Wood or whatever. But he is the first one to say, here's what happened and here's why I'm right. And everyone believes him. So there's just something about him. I think back to like the whole Shelley and Owen thing. Like he was quick to be like, actually, here's what happened and here's why and here's what we're going to do. So I don't see him as like, it's kind of funny. I don't see him, I mean, he is evil, but I don't see him as like the villain necessarily, because in those moments, even though if it was for manipulation, he was trying to help, even though it was ultimately for his gain. So, but I guess you could say that about anybody, doesn't everybody just help someone just for their own benefit in some way? So he just takes it to the extreme.
Yeah. I think that just like ties in with like the whole idea like self-centeredness that we talked about at the beginning of this conversation with the characters, and just like, they're kind of left to no other choice but to do that for their own fulfillment and propulsion for betterment in society. Like there's no lack of, no one's looking out for you, it's all on you. And that's kind of what drives a lot of these characters, is finding their own way to that promised land that will fulfill them. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess last thing, I know I spoke about this earlier too, but in terms of the coincidence and the technology and the surveillance. How did that work for? Did that work for you all? Because for me, as I said before, like I found it a little bit. Sometimes it seemed a little too coincidental or too easy as an out for some of the plotting here. But also, I think with the way that this novel is structured and the story it's trying to tell, I think it was kind of necessary. But did that work for you, or is it just my minor gripe?
I think it worked for me. I mean, again, I kind of went into this knowing that this was being pitched as like an eco thriller. So I take some of those things into consideration, where I'm not really going to be as hung up about plot holes, as I would be with something else perhaps. But I honestly was just so glued to this book. I really didn't stop twice to really consider, oh, is that actually logistical sense? I just kind of went with it because I was having such a good time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, even up to the end, I guess the last question I have for you all. I was thinking about like how this novel plays out, I guess, after the novel closes in terms of we have Tony's final scene. I mean, what do you think happens with this plot? Like, what do you think goes on as soon as we leave Tony? Did you guys have any thoughts about that? Or do you not even think about, after the book closes, what happens? I know it's not really relevant, but
I feel like even though I liked how it ended based on Tony's final scene, I thought it was really profound in its own way. I do still technically feel a little cheated just because it feels like there's no clear resolution about, like, it just feels like I finished a chapter, really. It didn't feel like I finished like the story. But that could lead to kind of like what you mentioned, Jalen, the believability possibly or realism of this book at times feeling cartoonish just based on the hijinks that ensue, which kind of like gives me uncanny valley vibes a little. But I mean, any stories you hear in real life of uh thriller consequences or like true crime or whatever, this almost kind of felt like I was listening to a true crime podcast when I was reading it. Is outlandish as those can sound, they happen to people and they're real. But I think ultimately it's just based on this whole story, in my opinion, being about the power of like how we're able to capture and like take charge of a narrative like Robert does, he's so expert at, and how you can mold anything into something what you want it to be, like Birnam would, this concept. Which, you know what, if I were to hear someone on the street approach me telling me about Birnam Wood, I still would be really confused. I'm like, I really understand what you guys do, but I feel like that's so many like startups or whatever, or that sphere of the world or whatever, that mostly confuses me anyway. So if someone tells me it well enough, then I'll believe them. So maybe I'm a sucker too, but
Yeah.
I feel like Catton did a good job at that, the ideas of that with Birnam Wood.
yeah, and I
I
guess.
mean,
Sorry, go ahead, Chad.
no, I was just thinking that, like, as Alex was describing that piece, I was like, yeah, or maybe just in general, like what happens after and is it believable? I think I used to be a lot more, as a reader, critical of those types of endings of like, oh, that's really just like a letdown, but I've kind of I maybe changed my point of view. And with this book, I think the ending is actually just about perfect for all the reasons we've described before. And in terms of it being like, how is it going to be resolved? And doesn't it seem a little far-fetched? But like, I think the point that Catton's trying to make is that we live in like these times that are just not normal, however you want to take that. And I think whether it's like a true crime doc or like the proliferance of people coming up with like alternative theories of like what really happened, I think like it just lends itself to like the contemporaneous nature of how we live and how we get information. It goes back and forth with like the texts, the emails that happen. It's just like, when the opening scene when Shelley's watching Mira on that like Find My Friend app, and she's just like kind of like thinking like, oh, well, she must be going to this place. Like we're always telling each other these ideas of like what's happening. And then when we actually hear the truth, we just either brush it off or criticize it or have skepticism behind it. So I think it's very much in tune with like the point of view that Catton takes here.
Yeah, I mean, that's something really interesting about how what kind of caused that question for me was like just how Lemoyne's trying to set up Tony as the one that did all of this, and so like the dueling narratives and the stories that we tell about the things that we see and the way that we receive that information, as you're saying, Chad, is really interesting. And that's when we think, I was like, I wonder what, like from an outside perspective, aside from us kind of knowing what happens in terms of reading the novel, like what would actually that look like. And yeah, I think she does a really interesting. She crafts an interesting picture with all those final pieces and doesn't really necessarily tie it up for the reader, which is in a sense satisfying. So yeah. Well, I mean, that's all I had on this book, I think. Does anyone have anything else they want to add about it or want to talk about like her other books in comparison to this? Like, does anyone have a ranking of them? And we can close. 'Cause I don't know. I think I want to read The Luminaries, but it does. It's a big book, so I don't know if we'll get to it soon. But I really like this, so I'm curious to see how she works in. It's about astrology, right? I don't even know what it's about. It's all I know, I
Yeah,
think. Okay.
I would recommend it for sure. I think you would really love it. I think any of us would. Well, besides Alex, you've read it. I don't know, Ellie. I'm not sure if you've read Burnham or The Luminaries, but yeah, I mean that was the first one I read, and then I went back and read the rehearsal. But I just think, and last point about Birnam Wood, I think this would make a tremendous adaptation for the screen. It feels so cinematic, in a way that, you're itching to see how this would play out with someone with the skill to like have that vision. And the other fun fact I wanted to point out was that I listened to one interview where she said she named Shelley after Mary Shelley. And so there's like maybe some Frankenstein, is it the doctor or the monster? So we didn't really get into that, but there's something to like chew over maybe later. Yeah, but I think you would love Luminaries. It deals with astrology in its structure. Again, like she's very big on structure, and how the reader is reading the book. Same with rehearsal. Even her, it's a very distinct, hyper realist kind of book. But anyone else can chime in.
I would be curious because I, especially Ellie, I don't remember how you've maybe mentioned earlier in our hui what your Catton history is. I don't remember because I chatted with you just mentioning rehearsal. I guess I would also be curious what everyone's rankings would be, other than you, Jalen. I'm sorry, since you haven't read, and then Ellie pending. But for me, at least, Birnam would last, then rehearsal, then Luminaries at the top. And Jalen, I really do think you'd like Luminaries. To me, it's just Birnam Wood, but like to the max. Like Birnam Wood is like diet Luminaries to me. But still Birnam Wood has like HBO Max, or I'm sorry, Max written all over it. So I think
that's a very good comparison.
It's gonna, that's, man, they should really use me for the blurbs.
They should have you on the marketing of Max too, because they need to fix that name. But no, I would say for me, rehearsal's third, but then the top two are really close. I mean, I think it's just recency. I'd put Birnam Wood first. It's about half the size of Luminaries, and it's set in the present day versus Luminaries is set in the historic 19th century. But they're both really, really good. And there's a lot of payoff. And there's some really fun elements from what I remember. I read The Luminaries like maybe 7 years ago. It's been quite some time. But again, it sticks with you because Catton is that good of a writer, where there's a reason, I think, why she took just about 10 years in between this book and Luminaries. It's like she really makes you wait, but it's always a payoff that, in my estimation, is worth it.
Yeah, I haven't read any of her books, so this is the only one I've read, but I definitely want to read some more from her. And another just little side note, it's interesting that Jalen mentioned Jonathan Franzen, because my husband was asking me about this book, and I literally told him it's as if Jonathan Franzen and Dan Brown wrote a book.
Yes,
that's what it is. It
absolutely.
is so there's two sides of this book, and it's those two. I don't know why I think Dan Brown, but I don't have much thriller background, so that's just who I picked. But I'm definitely gonna.
It's pretty. I would say that's accurate. Like I remember reading the Da Vinci Code and like some of those other clunkers after that, but yeah.
I guess so. Do you guys think it'll make the Booker long list? I mean, it seems like it will to me, but I don't know.
Alex is saying hell no.
I do not think so. I would be surprised if Birnam Wood was even shortlisted for or longlisted for any, like a National Book Award or whatever. I know whoever behind the scenes people in power of literary awards, I know they probably love Catton. Now that Catton's been released from her literary prison, I hope they let Donna Tartt out next. So
seriously, we're going to continue that horn. Like when we talked about it with Bret Easton Ellis last month, we're like, Donna, you're next. Like, no, I would love it to be long listed. I don't think it would be because I just feel, well, I have my own personal theories about the Booker and the route it's taken over the last couple of years. I just don't think it's going to be the kind of book that they want to push. Yeah, I would love it to be recognized.
Yeah, I've been interested. I've been trying to follow the book over the last few years because my friend Kieran, who does lots of Booker coverage. He loved this book, so that's what made me
Yeah.
think, yeah, which I was kind of surprised by.
His review was, I really enjoyed his review. That's kind of what made me like, okay, I need to like get to it really soon. And then I think you picked it too, and so that was another bump. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll see, and we'll have to, reconvene in the group chat or something once that happens and kind of talk about it. But last thing, I wanted to just give a last call for recommendations for June. I'm thinking about picking Mating by Norman Rush just because this book has been having like a resurgence, I guess. I've seen a lot of like Twitter discourse around it. I actually, fun fact, I still have my bookmark in here. I unintentionally DNF'd it last summer, but not because it wasn't good. It was just because too much was going on, and yeah, it was unintentional. But I really liked it. I liked the narration. I think it'd be fun. It's a really smart book, but it's long, so I don't know. But aside from that, I was thinking maybe the new Emma Cline. All of this to say, if anyone has no, okay, Alex has veto power on that one.
Yeah, the new Emma Cline is not good. I'll go ahead and just
Ooh.
so we
Okay.
can skip that one. So
Okay.
if you're listening in, don't read it. If Emma Cline's publicist is watching this or something, don't come after me. But yeah, although I've heard Matings, I have a close source that told me Mating apparently is very similar to the voice of Celine from The Idiot, so I'm sure I'll love it already. So why not?
Yeah. Alex, I think you will love this character. Like I think, and it has like a love story, and I feel like it's Alex bait for sure. So, and I need to tackle with other people. I was on my own, and I was doing it on audio as well, which I feel like was maybe not. I don't know. I wasn't paying enough attention. But let me know if you guys want to do Mating or not, and then we'll meet next month for the birthday party.
Yeah.
I'm very excited about this, and hopefully it's a more successful thriller for Alex. If you're gonna join, no pressure. But I think we'll go.
Oh, I will be. Don't worry.
Okay.
I'll have the the hot takes, I'm sure, of the birthday party. So
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we'll take a little break from thrillers after that. But thank you all for joining me today. This was really fun. And yeah, I'll sign off here. Thanks everyone.
bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.